Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Book of Corinthians, chapter 15, verse 33. Upon booting up Rotten Paradise and starting a new game, you will see this quote. Oftentimes, when a piece of media includes a quote right off the bat, I find myself not even remembering it as the story unfolds. However, just this once, I found myself paying attention. October's finally here! Hooray! Which means that Studio Investigrave's newest game, Rotten Paradise, is finally out. Leading up to the release, I've been so excited to sink my teeth into a new horror game, especially since this one takes place in summer. A nice bridge between the end of the warmer months here in the northern hemisphere and autumn, if I do say so myself. Once the game launched, I immediately downloaded it, pulled up my coconut-shaped cup filled with orange juice, and strapped in for another Studio Investigrave banger. However, when I watched the ending credits for the second time upon completing both endings, I frantically looked up a walkthrough guide for the game because I was sure that I had done something wrong. And yet, I found that I had played the game exactly the way I was supposed to. I was left so unbelievably confused, and I know I'm not the only one who was left this way. With Rachel Draws This from the studio saying that they will explain what the game was about near the end of this month, and having some time to sit with the game and collect my thoughts, I figured now would be a good time for me to share my own opinions on what I thought this game was about. From here on out, there will be spoilers for Rotten Paradise, along with potentially disturbing content from the game. Please proceed with caution if you wish to continue watching. And of course, this is all just my interpretation of the game. Having an alternate opinion is cool, and in fact, encouraged. I'm just a person on the internet after all. Grab your Hawaiian shirt and a gallon of water, and let's dive into what this game is really about. Before we jump into any potentially heavy metaphors this game is hiding, why don't we try to decipher what is actually happening on our screens first? Throughout the game, the various side and main characters allude to some mysterious entity known only as her and she, before ultimately walking off into the ocean. So I was originally under the impression that this was some sort of siren situation. Sirens have been a part of fiction for a very long time. I mean, the Odyssey, which was made in like the 8th century BC, even features them. They're often depicted as looking at least somewhat like a human woman, which would make sense for the people at the resort to call the entity a she. However, I think it's more likely that the she in question is actually the ocean. We never actually see any sort of entity in the game, but the ocean can almost always be seen or referenced in some sort of way throughout the game. Returning things or appeasing her is a reoccurring line of dialogue from various characters, and I believe it makes sense why they're doing that if they're trying to become one with the ocean. Eating pieces of metal will guarantee they sink to the ocean floor faster. Eating the seafood laid out as a buffet and walking out into the water might be seen as a way of returning the dead sea life to the ocean. Drinking excessive amounts of water or laying around in it often might make the person doing it feel like they're closer to the ocean, since they're absorbing so much water, whether through just their skin or by drinking it. But why are they doing this? Is the ocean calling to them or something, you may be asking? I believe the reason why they're trying to do all this has actually been revealed to us before we even started playing the game. On the warning screen, one of the warnings listed is mass hysteria/compulsion. This article from the National Library of Medicine defines mass hysteria as a social phenomenon consists of collective anxiety due to a perceived threat and can culminate in a cascade of symptoms suggestive of organic disease without an identifiable cause, which fits the situation of Rotten Paradise quite well. Let's try this out for size. At an island resort in Australia, the guests slowly succumb to mass hysteria in which they are convinced that the storms that roll over are indicative that the ocean is going to take back what's rightfully hers. They try to appease the ocean by consuming excessive water, binge eating seafood, eating metal, and soaking in water for long periods of time, with all of them eventually walking into the ocean to presumably cut their lives short. The main character ultimately chooses whether or not to join in the madness depending on whether or not she wants to be left behind by her friends that are hysterical. I don't know about you, but I think that makes a lot more sense than a siren or the ocean trying to lure a bunch of island resort guests to their own deaths. But now that we have that settled, I think it's time to address what you're likely here for. Rotten Paradise is a metaphor, but what of? I've seen many different interpretations of the meaning of this game, from addiction to social isolation to many others in between. I think that all of these are fascinating ideas worthy of exploration. However, there is one I find most appealing. I believe that Rotten Paradise is about unhealthy friendships and how detrimental they can be. When we first start the game, it's not immediately obvious what the true nature of June's friends are. Most unhealthy friendships aren't often bad right off the bat, or at least in my experiences. Though there are signs. McCoy calls June, quote, really lazy and messy and forgetful in the prologue when she mentions that she was just worried about being late. She waves off this remark and says it's okay, but it's hard to ignore the face she makes when she says that, which looks like she's uncomfortable or maybe even hurt by it. June also says, I knew something was off for Vaughn to be that happy to see me anyway, after finding out that her and McCoy had made bets to see who would arrive last to the docks. Which, again, could just be a joke, but she does make the same uncomfortable expression when she says this about Vonnie. If you choose to interact with the waterfall fountain in the lobby, McCoy will attempt to push June into it, which makes her visibly upset. Interacting with Vonnie will prompt June to say, Vaughn treats chewing out underpaid employees like it's an art form, which just further shows how she seemingly enjoys hurting people for no reason other than for her own pleasure. We don't start to see signs of Carmen's unhealthy behaviors until near the end of Friday night. After we see a woman coughing up a piece of metal, June is quick to point it out to the group. Everyone else, with the exception of Ryan, is dismissive of her feelings, with Carmen even suggesting that she hallucinated the whole thing happening because of excessive drinking. I've seen some people call this gaslighting, but I think that's a stretch since it seems more like Carmen is just trying to dismiss what June saw rather than make her feel crazy, if that makes sense. It's worth mentioning that before the woman starts coughing up the chunk of metal, June has a conversation with her friends about how a cousin of hers parted ways with a bad friend group that she supposedly should have left a long time ago. Bit on the nose, huh? This serves as not only a parallel to June herself, but also foreshadowing for her choice to come, whether or not she wants to stay with her friends when their toxicity reaches its peak. Another thing I'd like to address before we move on is this interesting, reoccurring motif about sharks. I think that the sharks are another foreshadowing to how June's friend group will be descending into danger here soon. They're brought up quite a bit on the first day, and we even get some interesting dialogue about them, such as, are sharks even pack animals? And I don't think they're even local to the area. Sharks can just be the animal, but another meaning for this word is a person who takes advantage of others. Sure, the animals don't hunt in packs, but June's friends all move as a pack, and they also had to travel here, meaning that they're not local to the area either. There's also multiple times a line referencing someone being eaten by sharks is brought up, which I think is kind of foreshadowing to how June will be chewed out by her friends on Saturday night. Speaking of Saturday night, this is truly when we start to see the true nature of June's friends. In this metaphor, I think the mass hysteria that is starting to take over them isn't exactly a mass panic, but rather just a placeholder for some sort of stressful experience the group is going through. Whatever it is, the more stressed the group gets, the more their exterior friendliness begins to deteriorate. McCoy during the day on Friday said that he doesn't exactly encourage violence, yet his first instinct when June sees him binge drinking is to hit her. When she rightfully goes to Vonnie to seek shelter and comfort from what McCoy did, we find her binge eating before yelling at June. Eating disorders are incredibly complex things, and let me be clear, having one does not make you a better or worse person. We don't see this behavior from Vonnie before this night, which makes me think that when experiencing stress, she might rely on binge eating to cope. What I do think she does wrong, though, is lashing out at June when she expresses concern about McCoy being physically violent towards her. It seems as though her temper towards underpaid employees was directed at June for a change, which is not at all healthy, to say the least. Carmen's case is a bit stranger than the other two since she doesn't physically or verbally attack June right off the bat when encountering her. Instead, she seems very defensive and almost sympathetic. She tells June about how she supposedly got into some sort of spat with Ryan, which made me initially think that maybe Ryan has started going crazy with everyone else, leaving Carmen in a very fragile state. But upon meeting up with Ryan, you find out that this isn't the case at all. I think that Carmen's unhealthy trait that surfaces with stress is being needlessly snappy, defensive, and even obscuring certain facts about events in order to make sure that the person listening to her sides with her. And of course, the list wouldn't be complete without Ryan. Ryan throughout the game is very obviously not like June's other friends. He wears a jacket and sweatpants to a summer island resort. He hangs out in the background of a lot of group shots, and he even sides with June when the bizarre events start happening. Hell, he's never hostile towards her and even helps her along in the story. When experiencing stress with the rest of the group, his first reaction is to self-isolate. When the group falls into noticeable disrepair to the point where he can't ignore it anymore, he ultimately gets dragged down with McCoy, Vonnie, and Carmen. Why? Well, June told us why. He's easier to bully and peer pressure than any of the other people in the group. Who's to say that the rest of the group didn't do just that to keep Ryan from leaving? He tells June that he'd rather leave the group behind than stick with them knowing that they treat June terribly, but his actions speak far louder than his words. In a way, the quote from the Bible at the beginning of the game could apply to both Ryan and June in the way of their friends corrupting them. Ryan says that he wouldn't want to stay with people that hurt June, and yet he does it anyway, presumably under their influence. June, on the other hand, feels as though she should stay with the group despite the harm they've caused her. Ultimately, it's June's decision whether or not she wants to stay with them or finally walk away from the friends that have caused her so much distress and pain. If she chooses to stay, it seems that she does so more for Ryan than anyone else, since we see her holding on to only him in the ending where she does stay. The rest of the group might be beyond saving to her, but perhaps in her eyes she still sees potential in Ryan. On the other hand, if she chooses to leave, June is alone and never sees what happened to her friends. Unfortunately, that's kind of how it goes with cutting off friends that aren't healthy for you. Sometimes you'll be left isolated and unaware of the path that your old friends ended up walking when you leave them behind. A tragic but surprisingly realistic end for this story. Rotten Paradise isn't a perfect game, but the meaning behind the events that occur both in a literal and metaphorical sense have been on my mind ever since I finished both of the endings the day the game was released. The open-endedness of the game leaves for a lot of room for many different interpretations of it, so I hope you find mine at least a little bit compelling, and if not, then I hope you find one that satisfies you. If you find yourself relating to June in your own friendships, then I gently encourage you to re-examine the relationships you have. June's story may be tragic, but yours doesn't have to be. Please take care of yourself and remember that you are never alone. There will always be people who can help if you have the courage to ask for it. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of you bearing with me for the kind of wonky upload schedule I've had lately. I recently started college actually, so it's been a bit of a struggle trying to get into a normal rhythm, but hopefully everything evens out here soon. As always, please leave your thoughts, theories, video suggestions, or anything else in the comments below. I always love hearing what everyone has to say. As of right now, I'm at 725 subscribers, which is absolutely crazy. Thank you all so much. I genuinely appreciate that this many people enjoy what I have to say. If you liked the video and want to see other stuff like it in the future, please consider liking this video and subscribing. Also, if you want a little bit extra from me, I have a Patreon. It's just one tier for $5 right now, but if you subscribe, or I guess pledge, I'm not really sure how the language for that works, you'll get downloads to all of my video backgrounds and thumbnails, since I draw all of them myself, along with getting all my videos a week early. So patrons actually got to see this one before YouTube. So yeah. Alrighty, I'll see you sometime in the future. Bye!